It's the Farmer to Farmer Podcast, episode 119, and this is your host, Chris Blanchard. Father and son team Jeff and Zach Hawkins raised 2 acres of vegetables, 20 acres of grain, and a variety of livestock on 60 additional acres of pasture at the Hawkins Family Farm outside of North Manchester, Indiana. About half of their sales go through a CSA, with the remainder going through farmers markets and local restaurants, as well as an on-farm pizza night. Jeff shares the story of how the farm was started by his grandparents in the mid-1950s and how he came back and then changed the farm from a hobby farm to farming in earnest in 2003. We also dig into Zach's return to the farm in 2013 and the accompanying expansion in markets and management that was made to accommodate an additional person on the farm. Jeff and Zach also share how they've made the relationships on this small family farm work, including the ways that their respective spouses are and are not involved in the operation. Zach shares some of the details about how they've integrated the vegetable and livestock operations, including the use of pasture patches to grow some of the vegetable crops. Zach and Jeff share how they plan their way through the diversity of operations and the decision-making processes they use to do it. We also discuss some of the challenges they've faced, including how they overcame regulatory and legislative hurdles to processing their chickens on farm, and how they approach food safety with livestock and vegetables on the same operation. Just a note here, this episode was recorded in late March, so keep that in mind when we're discussing fieldwork and such. The Farmer to Farmer podcast is generously supported by Vermont Compost Company, founded by organic crop growing professionals committed to meeting the need for high-quality compost and compost-based living soil mixes for certified organic plant production, vermontcompost.com. And by BCS America. BCS two-wheel tractors are versatile, maneuverable in tight spaces, and lightweight for less compaction, and easy to maintain and repair on the farm. Gear-driven and built to last for decades of dependable service, bcsamerica.com. And by Farmers Web, software for your farm. Farmers Web makes it easier to work with your buyers, saving time, reducing errors, and increasing your capacity to work with more buyers overall. farmersweb.com. Zach and Jeff Hawkins, welcome to the Farmer to Farmer podcast.
Hey, thanks for having us, Chris. Sure glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I'd like to start off with just having you kind of give us the lay of the land there at J.L. Hawkins Family Farm. Where are you guys located, and how many acres are you farming, and what are you growing, and how are you selling it?
Yeah, so our farm is 99 acres. We're just outside of North Manchester, Indiana, and that's in northern Wabash County. The nearest city would be Fort Wayne. That's about 30 miles due east of here. So on our farm, we've got the majority of ground in pasture. Actually, it's probably somewhere between 60 and 65 acres in pasture, and we're using that to raise livestock. We've got about 10 acres in feed corn, which goes into the animal feed. We've got another 10 acres or so in small grains, which is acting as a nurse crop for pasture. There's a little 5-acre woodlot, and then we have a garden space, which kind of fluctuates, but there's generally around 2 acres in vegetable production every season. And we can talk about how that breaks down if you'd like. And so we're raising kind of like a lot of small batches of a variety of things. So we're doing plenty of different garden vegetables and herbs. We're raising beef and pork. We've got broiler chickens. We've got layers for eggs. We do Thanksgiving turkeys, and then these grains as well.
That's quite a diversity of products. How are you selling all of that?
We have a number of market streams. The one that we focus on is CSA. I don't know, Dad, maybe that's about like half of our revenue right now. That's packaged in a couple different ways. We do a vegetable-only CSA, but then we also have this farm share where we're trying to reflect the diversity of what we're growing in our marketing approach. So that will include the vegetables and then also chickens, beef, pork, eggs. They get a Thanksgiving turkey, and in the future they may be actually getting some of the small grains we're producing too.
Interesting. And then where else are you selling your products?
We do one farmer's market, which is kind of a recent addition. We're also using that as a CSA pickup. And we sell to a number of local restaurants as well. That's actually been picking up kind of as the farm-to-table way of cooking comes to our part of the country.
And when you say local restaurants, are you looking in the town of North Manchester there, or are you guys taking that over to Fort Wayne?
Both. We've got one cafe here in town that uses a large number of local products, both from our farm and other farms. But then the majority of it's going to Fort Wayne. And then another more populous community is the Warsaw, Winona Lake, Indiana area. So we're heading there every week as well.
That's quite a distribution run.
Yeah, we do spend some time traveling during the course of the week, but we're in a pretty rural area, and so that's been necessary for us. But we do try to package, we're going there for a CSA pickup, but also doing restaurant deliveries. So each trip is accomplishing more than one objective.
Yeah, we also, it's kind of a holdover from earlier times, but we have some customers that continue to buy a quarter of a beef or a half of a hog. We have a little on-farm store where we've got ground beef and eggs and so forth. Those are not as significant as they once were as we move more toward the CSA and wholesale restaurant model, but they still are part of our revenue stream and part of people being involved here at our farm as well.
Now, how long has your farm been where it is?
Yeah, my grandfather and grandmother, Leo and Velma Hawkins, purchased this farm in 1957 when they were in their 50s. So they actually rented farm ground for most of their lives, saved their money, bought this place. We are so very blessed by that because they were pretty fussy. And so it's fine sandy loam soil, well situated, well drained. And so in the 50s, they were here. I was born in 1954, the later part of the year. So not long after I was born, they purchased this. And I remember visiting here. My dad didn't grow up here since he was long out of the house, but I remember visiting here very, very frequently. And so it's kind of been in the family and in my life for all of my life. We moved to the farm in 1988 after being in Minnesota and Wisconsin and Michigan, and started to really just piddle at it a little bit. More hobby farming than anything else. We raised some chickens. We had a couple of calves for beef and a large garden and that sort of thing. And over time, that kind of we're able to make every mistake, probably, at least a lot of them, in a small way as we learn some new ways of doing some things here, and then continue to move forward with it until about 2003. And in 2003, then really in earnest is when we cast our lot with the farm and started the CSA and decided that it would be not really hobby, but more integral to our lives and livelihood.
What made you decide to make that change?
Well, it's an unusual story. The reason we came to town was actually in 1987 is because I was called to serve as a pastor in town. I'm a Lutheran pastor. And that first year we kind of pretended the farm wasn't here because we wanted to know we were called to that ministry and so forth. But had some housing issues, and my dad owned the farm at the time and was renting the farmhouse. And I said to my wife, let's rent from my dad. Let's move to the farm. And she said, why would we do that? She was a city girl and didn't know who the kids would play with since there weren't next door neighbors and that sort of thing. But we moved here, fell in love with it. And it was really good for me because it was a wonderful balance to the hectic nature of parish life as a parish pastor. It was hectic in its own way, but in kind of a different way. So that's what brought us here.
And I was probably like maybe 6 or 7 years old when we moved out to the farm. So, and then, Dad was still going into town every day to work, and we were kind of raising a few animals here and there, but I don't think either I or my dad would describe our upbringing as like a real farm upbringing, and I certainly didn't think that I was going to be farming as I was growing up here. So we both kind of had our own return to the farm.
That's a really good point. Nor did I. I was born in Detroit, Michigan, actually, but we had an acre of ground, and my mother raised rabbits. We had a large garden. That this farm ethos or culture has always kind of been, have your hands in the soil, but it wasn't really an active, like, get up and milk cows every day sort of an upbringing for me nor for Zach. So we were away from it and returned. And I think, that return gives you a little different sense too about where it fits in your life and its vitality and the privilege it is to do it.
Engaging in such a diversity of enterprises, the livestock, the vegetables, and a lot of different kinds of livestock, are all of those integrated into the same rotation, or are the vegetables just kind of out there on their own doing their own thing?
Yeah, that question presupposes an earlier question, Chris, in that the reason that we have such a diversity stems from a farm philosophy that asks this question first. The question is, will what we are doing contribute to the health of the farm? And we understand health in a really wide and deep, wholesome, whole farm kind of a way. So we never make a decision on an enterprise based solely on that enterprise, but it really has to do with whether it contributes to the health of the farm. And if it doesn't, we pretty much ignore it, even if it might prove to be in the short run more lucrative economically. But we look at the long term, we look at the whole farm. So having said that, how does a whole farm operate in the wholeness of nature in an ecosystem? And we recognize that nature never farms without animals, for example, unto health. And so our livestock and our vegetables really are all part of this same whole farm diversity. Everything moves on our farm. I mean, everything rotates. Zach will talk a lot more competently about how the animals actually rotate through the gardens and fallow times and so forth. But it really stems from that more philosophical stance. Zach, why don't you talk about animals in the garden?
Sure. Well, we have kind of basically two gardening approaches happening every season on the farm. One of those happens out actually in the pasture. They're kind of like, I guess we call them pasture patches, where we're raising crops that require a little bit more space. So like sweet corn and winter squash and potatoes. And there we're actually breaking into the pasture for 3 or 4 seasons to raise the vegetables and then returning it back to pasture. And so out there, actually to do the breaking, some seasons we're using hogs to kind of do the initial turning over of the soil. But of course, that ground has been tended by livestock for years and years and years before we come to it to grow vegetables. We're running the cattle over it, we're running the chickens over it, and so it's pretty healthy, biologically active soil, and it's relatively easy to grow vegetables out there. So that's kind of the relationship between the livestock and the vegetables in one sense. But then we also have about 1 1/3 acres in kind of more like permanent garden beds where we're doing more intensive cropping. So like lots of greens and roots and things like that. And the way that we use the livestock there is we follow a system that's heavily inspired by Ann and Eric Nordell, Pennsylvania, of taking a year off of production every year for part of the garden, growing at least 2 mature cover crops, usually incorporating a summer bear fallow. And so that time gives us the opportunity to use laying hens to graze the cover crop, and actually maybe to use them in the bear fallow as well without having a lot of the concerns that you would about having livestock like, in and around vegetables while they're growing.
Right. So tell me some of the details about how you're actually managing the laying hens on those cover crops right up next to the vegetable crops.
Sure. Well, that's something we continue to develop every year. I certainly wouldn't say we have it completely figured out, but it's a lot of fun to make improvements every year. One of the pieces of equipment that help us do this approach is electrified poultry netting. I'm not quite sure how we would be able to do it without the electrified poultry netting. We're using that to contain the birds and to move them around in the cover crops pretty easily. We're also in the process of designing like a mobile shelter that works with the birds out in the garden. So it has to be pretty lightweight to be able to move around, but we get a decent amount of wind out here, so it also, can't blow over. Putting those elements in place, also being able to easily move feed and water, that's a necessity. We're only in the fallow parts of the garden with the birds for maybe like 6 to 8 weeks during the course of the season. So it tends to be a lot to manage during that time because we're trying to move them quickly, but it also isn't like during the entire course of the season. They spend most of their time actually out on the pasture.
And the other livestock that you have on the farm, are they integrated into the vegetable operation as well, outside of the pasture gardens that you put in place?
We have found that just using the pigs pre-garden and the laying pan, during the bare fallow season, at this point seems to work pretty well in terms of managing the soil and eating bugs and weed seeds and that sort of thing. There was a time many years ago that in the fall we might run cattle through to clean up some of the leftover stuff from the garden, but we haven't done that in a lot of years. So I don't know that that's part of your vision or plan. I don't think so, Zach, at all. So really, it's those two classes of livestock that integrate in the garden.
Yeah, pretty much just the laying hens out in the permanent gardens, and then the rest of the animals, certainly like in the pasture patches, are contributing a lot to the gardens, but they're separated by a good amount of time and space.
Now, when you talk about putting crops out in the pasture, I'm looking at a map of your farm, and it looks like you guys have a pretty flat 99 acres.
That's right.
Yeah, it is. There's some gently rolling areas, but it's not real hilly, no.
Talk to me a little bit more about how you're actually managing the Nordell style rotation in what's really a pretty small spot of vegetables. What kinds of tools are you using to manage the bare fallow and the cover cropping? Are you in there with tractors, or are you doing all of this with a BCS or other tools?
Yeah, and so in that acre and a third garden area, I may go in there occasionally with our 1959 John Deere 530. Is that right, Dad?
That's right.
Yeah, my great grandpa actually bought that tractor new when they got the farm. But I might go in there every so often with the disc just to kind of reset things. But like 90% of the time we're just using a BCS out there because it really isn't that much to manage. And so it's kind of divided into 4 sections. Each one is about a third of an acre. And so we're growing vegetables in 2 of those sections every year. Over the last couple of years, I've learned a lot from reading like Jean-Martin Fortier's book. Of course, we got our start with Elliot Coleman's ideas. I actually just finished up The Urban Farmer, Curtis Stone's book. And so we're trying to use some of those styles of techniques for the intensive growing. So we kind of do the 30-inch sort of semi-raised beds made with the BCS. We're trying to do close spacing with a 4-row pinpoint seeder or an earthway, doing a lot of transplanting. The last couple of seasons, we've really found a lot of great uses for the silage tarps, which has helped us to keep a pretty minimum till approach. Like for instance, we just used the rotary power harrow on the BCS, and it's I'm trying to think about where to start and kind of describing how we do that with the Nordell rotation. Maybe it's good to kind of start in the fall. So last fall, for the area that we're going to be gardening now, we were just coming out of a 6-week bare fallow period. So you're kind of given a blank slate, right? So I went in and shaped beds with BCS and a disc hiller bed shaper attachment from Earth Tools.
Right.
And then sowed down most of those beds to an oat and pea cover crop. And that was, I was a little late. We kind of tried to do that toward the end of August, maybe. I think I was in early to mid-September at that point. We had a really mild fall, however, though, so it worked out well. So a lot of those beds are growing up a pretty good amount of biomass and then winter killing over the course of the winter. And then we just went in maybe a couple weeks ago and tarped all of those winter-killed beds. So they're kind of hanging out now, warming up a little bit. We got a bit of a cold spill here, so it's still kind of chilly, but I think those tarps help them warm up a little bit. But also, help maybe germinate a generation of weed seed, kill off any of the field peas that made it through the winter, that sort of thing, and just sort of like really mellow out the soil. The soil underneath those winter-killed oats is already pretty mellow, but we found that when we put those tarps on for a number of weeks and then pull them back to start planting, it's just a pretty excellent conditions for that early in the spring. And of course, there's really no tractor work to do. We might go over with that power harrow and sort of stir things up just a little bit, but we can kind of just get in and start going. So that's for most of the beds for the early season. I do have some beds that are in a rye cover crop that was sown again back in September, and of course live through the winter. And then I'll let those grow all the way nearly to maturity before I will go in with a roller crimper, a 30-inch roller crimper, and knock all that stuff down for fall planted brassicas.
So doing a true no-till system for those fall planted brassicas.
Right. And this will just be our second or third season, so we've got a lot to figure out there, but it seems very promising to me.
That's kind of an exciting development. I mean, the no-till, I know there's a lot of interest in no-till vegetables, and there's a lot of different definitions of that, but I think when we really talk about a no-till crop, that Rodale method of rolling and crimping down an overwintered rye, I think is one of the most interesting approaches out there.
It certainly caught my imagination when I started learning about it and was trying to get information and read the Rodale book. And of course, that's geared toward a lot of field crops. And there are some folks kind of in our general area who I think are starting to look at it for their soybeans and stuff. But when I was looking into what options were available, for a small scale vegetable operation with a BCS, there isn't much yet. I hope to see it coming along soon, but even if I've asked folks that might have a better sense of what kind of tools we could use, I was looking at the no-till planters where they're cutting through that heavy residue and sticking seeds in the soil mechanically, and people are telling me, well, you just really can't get enough weight to do that on something that's only 30 inches wide. So we're still looking for the right kind of solutions for easily getting transplants through the mulch into the soil. We're going to try some different stuff out this year, but we haven't found it yet.
With as much cover crop seeding as you're doing on that small acreage, how are you getting those cover crops in and established?
Yeah, that was a little bit of an issue up until last season. We use cover crops out in the pasture patches, and it works pretty well to use like a broadcast seeder, like a hand crank broadcast seeder, and then just disc it in and work it in. But for the beds, I struggled for a while. I was actually out there hand scattering for a bit, which was kind of poetic for about the first 20 minutes. And then you look and see how many beds you had left to do. It got a lot less poetic. I tried ganging like some of the earthways together, and that sort of worked. But just last season, I got a drop seeder, like a hand push drop seeder, which it was the key. It just changed that job completely. I found a 36-inch model, so it fits over the bed nicely. Some of the seed dust go down kind of the shoulders and into the pathways, but I think that's great because it's just covering even more bare soil. It's adjustable, like it's a variable rate. Still trying to dial in the best the best numbers for each crop. But basically, what I wanted was an easy way to quickly put a lot of seed on these 30-inch beds, and that's been the ticket.
So it's my understanding that a lot of what you're producing is turning into product for your pizza night as well.
Yeah, that's true. The pizza night really started, Zach was helping on the farm, but he also was working in town, helping to start and manage a coffee shop. And he was the bread baker for that. And as a baker wanting to do it in the best way possible, he coveted a brick oven of some sort and kept kind of talking about that over and over again. And I started to listen a little because when I left the parish, I also started a not-for-profit organization. I do clergy continuing education here on our farm, and all nonprofits are looking for a way to raise revenue. And so I thought, maybe Zach has this interest and passion, and he always does good research and so forth, that maybe we could marry that energy that he had with this idea of a bread baking oven, but also a pizza oven. And at the time, we were aware of the A to Z bakery in Wisconsin, and they were doing pizzas. And we contacted them and just said, "How's this going?" and tell us about it. And they were encouraging of us. So we ended up, there's about a half a mile from our farm, there's an old brick farmhouse that is falling in. And I contacted the farmer or neighbor, and I said, "Hey, you care if I tear a wall out of that? I'll pay you 10 cents a brick." And he said, "That'd be fine." So we tore a wall out and reclaimed clean bricks and built a brick oven on the farm and started making pizzas initially as a revenue stream for the not-for-profit. But what we learned over time was that it distinguished our farm, in terms of what we offered. And so, people didn't really have that much of a sense that it was revenue for a not-for-profit, but it was, that pizza farm. So the farm benefited in terms of marketing quite a bit from it. And of course, we, in order to make it work, I've tried to raise some things for it as well. We don't currently raise the wheat for the dough, but it's our basil and our tomatoes and our pigs for the pepperoni and sausage and that sort of thing. So it seemed to really go together pretty nicely for both enterprises.
So tell me a little bit more about how that pizza night works. Is that a once a week thing for you guys?
It is. It's Friday evenings from 5 to 7 p.m., so it's a pretty short window. We only do pizzas. We do nothing else. People will bring other food if they want it. They bring their beverages. They bring a blanket or lawn chairs and sit out in our side yard. We try to have it's really near the garden, so they see that. We try to have maybe some of the livestock. We've got a handful of ducks in our grape arbor that try to keep the weeds down, and they're a novelty. The pigs sometimes are out there, and they're a novelty for people as well. There aren't a whole lot of what I call old McDonald farms, moo moo here and an oink oink there around anymore. And so part of the benefit to people is not just that it's really good pizza, but they come and get this farm experience. So it's very family friendly. We do it just during the season. So we start in June, we're done in September. And we oftentimes, it's volunteers really that help us do these pizzas. We have happened in the last couple of years upon, since we work with restaurants, and there tend to be the better restaurants, we ask if they would come and serve as a guest chef for a pizza night. So nearly every week we have a guest chef from one of the restaurants, and they create, we tell them what we have available, and they just create some pretty amazing, stunningly different pizzas, and that's a novelty for people too. They tend to sell very well, and it happens, weekly, which is great. Plus, it's really, really good pizza.
Having those guest chefs come to make their specials it's just been a great opportunity to deepen our relationship with the folks that are buying our farm products. Number one, it gives them a chance to come out to the farm, which a lot of chefs want to do, but we might be a little far and they're busy and don't have time. But it just, when you're spending a couple hours making pizza with someone, it just gives you a chance to talk a little bit more about what you do, about the farming side of things. I think it deepens their respect for the work and for the food. And we have a really good time. It's sort of funny because Dad mentioned that I started working in coffee shops and stuff for a while, but I don't really consider myself as someone with a lot of experience in food service. And the pizza nights, when it's just our family and volunteer labor can be a little bit stressful, but for these folks that are just doing this every day, it's a walk in the park. It's super easy for them. So they're actually they feel like they're relaxing and having fun during this. And they make things go a lot more smoothly because they know what they're doing. And so that's kind of been a nice surprise. We just sort of tried it out on a whim, but it's something we look forward to every season now.
There will be anywhere from 100 to 200 people here on the farm on a Friday night.
That's a lot of people to accommodate on your farm. I'm looking at, because I can spy on you, I'm looking at you on Google Maps here, and where do you park all those people? Like, how do you accommodate that large of a crowd on your farm?
Yeah. We happened onto this some years ago. We used to do a kind of like a fancy dinner in the gardens event every September. And so some of those logistics we were able to work out, at that time, and parking was one of them. People park all the way along our long farm lane on the south side of the lane at perpendicular parking. And so we can accommodate dozens of cars, parking. And then sometimes it'll be the length of the lane all the way to the road.
And where are most of your customers coming from? Are they coming from North Manchester, which is a pretty small town, I think about 6,000 people, or are they coming from further away?
Well, the pizza customers we have a pretty strong core of people from town or from Wabash County that come. We have a Manchester University here, and so a lot of the faculty tend to really like this kind of thing. But we have people from Fort Wayne, from the Warsaw-Winona Lake area. We have people from Indianapolis that drive up, people from South Bend that will drive down. We've had people come from Chicago before, from into Michigan, on a somewhat regular basis. It's not unusual, I guess, to have people drive a couple hours. This was a few years ago, but in the Chicago Tribune, there was an article on pizza farms, and we were named and as close enough to drive to, and people did.
That's pretty cool to get that kind of a reach.
Yeah, it sure is.
How have you guys dealt with regulators on that issue? Have you had to get licensed as a commercial kitchen? We stumbled upon a lot of things that have been in our favor. Not all of them, of course, but when we started this, it was and remains entirely for the purpose of raising revenue for the not-for-profit. All the proceeds go to this 501c3 organization. And so it's like a glorified bake sale. And so in terms of regulation, even though we have tended a lot of those kinds of things that if we did have a commercial kitchen or whatever, washable ceiling and walls and all that sort of thing, we're not officially regulated because it's a not-for-profit organization. So that hasn't been an issue for us. Now, our on-farm store is an official retail food establishment, and so we are inspected and regulated and so forth by our county health department and get a permit every year. But the pizza thing is outside of that. Now, you guys have also had some other interesting regulatory experiences with your on-farm processed poultry, right?
Indeed, we have. we celebrated a one-year anniversary here fairly recently of a victory in that department. We're so grateful for that. But yes, we're as part of this diversity, and we have been on a quite an expansion over the last few years. From 2003 to 2013. Pretty much this farming was really limited to me, and Zach would come home in summers because he was away at school or other kinds of things, to help out. But then in 2013, Zach decided that he wanted to come back to the farm full time, and so we have been on a quite an expansion since that time. We formed a limited partnership and have widened our markets, quite a bit and so on. So one of the pieces of that was to figure out how to do on-farm processing, in part for quality control, some for expense. It's less expensive, but not a whole lot less expensive. And then certainly for the well-being of the animals. The supply chain is so much shorter when on a Saturday morning we go out to the field 150 yards away and get birds and bring them up to the processing facility and process them and chill them and put them in a freezer. It's a pretty short supply chain. So anyway, that was a goal, and we investigated what it would take to do that and discovered 40-some-year-old federal law that is called an exemption. It allows farmers who raise their own birds to process their own birds. If it's from 1,000 to 20,000, there is regulation involved. You have to have an inspected facility that is constructed to their specifications and proper labeling and proper sanitation practices and water tests and all that sort of thing. So it is regulated. But it's not official state or USDA inspector who's here when the kill is happening. That's some of the difference. So that's what we're exempt from under this federal law. And we investigated and talked with our own state regulators on that. Yes, indeed, that law is recognized in Indiana. So we spent plenty of money and built a processing facility and started processing these birds and selling them to everybody, including restaurants, which is allowed under the law. But we had a state legislator who thought that that was unsafe, and so proposed legislation to make what we were doing not legal, not at least that we couldn't sell to restaurants, which at that time was about 30% of our chicken business. And, this started to move through the legislature, and it's hard to investigate a lot of these things. So on the face of it, it could make sense if you wanted to make a case and say, oh, it's not inspected, it must not be safe. But when you really look at it, you see that birds that have been produced under this model have actually had a better track record. There's not a single case of foodborne illness over those 40-some years. Now, that's not to say that it hasn't happened, but not a single recorded case at least. So, you'd think if it was unsafe, there should at least be some evidence. So anyway, that was kind of our argument, and that it was indeed safe, and that it was, a significant part of our business, and certainly our business plan. And we had a restaurant, Joseph's Dequeese restaurant in Roanoke, that really wanted to buy our birds. We're the only ones in the area at that time that did Freedom Rangers instead of the Cornish cross bird, and they really thought they were superior in terms of flavor and so forth. Anyway, so we had quite an ordeal of spending a whole winter studying the Indiana code and making trips to the State House, and finally, in the end, got significant enough support, which came in fair measure from a social media campaign, hashtag Keep Chicken on the Menu. We had some of our chefs that were, serving our chicken and telling our story, and there was enough interest in it that those voices got through to legislators, and they started to listen. And in the end, it wasn't, they weren't sure who was going to win, which side, but it was threatening enough that the lieutenant governor, who is our state agricultural head, got involved and brought all the parties together, and we came up with a solution that essentially mimics what the kind of regulation that happens in restaurants in order to get food safely on a plate. In addition to doing the state doing some microbial testing and that sort of thing, which is entirely fair. It's appropriate regulation. We like having this regulation actually that's scale appropriate because it gives us credibility. So we were really grateful that it went that way rather than not letting us do it because somehow we weren't inspected, which wasn't necessarily the value they thought it was.
All right, with that, we're going to stop here, take a break, get a word from our sponsors, and then we'll be right back with Zach and Jeff Hawkins from J.L. Hawkins Family Farm in northern Indiana. Perennial support for the Farmer to Farmer podcast is brought to you by BCS America. BCS two-wheel tractors are often mistaken for just a rototiller, but it is truly a superior piece of farming equipment. Engineered and built in Italy where small farms are a way of life, BCS tractors are built to standards of quality and durability expected of real agricultural equipment, the kind of dependability that every farm needs. I've worked with BCS tractors for over 24 years, and I wouldn't consider anything else for my small tractor needs. And I'm not the only fan. More than 1.5 million people in 50 countries have discovered the advantages of owning Europe's most popular two-wheel tractors. These really are small tractors with the kind of features found on their four-wheel cousins and a wide array of equipment: power harrows, rotary plows, flail mowers, snow throwers, sickle barn mowers, chippers, log splitters, and more. Check out bcsamerica.com to see photos and videos of BCS in action. bcsamerica.com. Perennial support is also provided by Vermont Compost Company, makers of Fort V and Fort Light potting mixes for certified organic plant transplant production. In the transplant greenhouse, all of your investment in plant material, heat, labor, and overhead depend absolutely on the performance of the media where you expect your plants to grow. And that media has a really hard job to do: produce a healthy plant in just a few cubic centimeters of soil. And Vermont Compost simply does it better. Here's what Zach and Jeff Hawkins have to say about it.
I just started using Fort V actually this season, and the difference in the quality of the transplants between what I was using before and Fort V is just immediately noticeable visibly. In fact, my dad will walk by the flats and just be like, the color looks different this year. what's going on? So I use it because it's a quality product, and it's evident that a lot of care has gone into it, and it works really well.
And he's really right, Chris. It's noticeable to me that the color of those seedlings is just deep and rich and elegant, and you can see it. So it's good stuff.
Taking care of growers by taking care of transplants since 1992. VermontCompost.com. All right, and we're back with Zach and Jeff Hawkins from J.L. Hawkins Family Farm in northern Indiana. Now, just before we went on break, Jeff, you were talking about the regulatory hurdles that you guys went through to be able to sell your on-farm processed poultry to restaurants, and how important that was, and how you actually came up with a regulatory solution with the legislature that makes sense and that was appropriate. I'd like to dig in just a little bit more about how you actually do that poultry production on the farm.
Yeah, we've, over the course of time, as I mentioned earlier, we have attempted and experimented in all sorts of different ways to do it. And with every model that you choose, there are benefits and there are liabilities. And it kind of, depends on the balance of those things, usually how you go forward. So when we started, I started doing this a long time ago, decades ago, when Joel Salatin from Virginia first started to come on the scene. He produced, I think it was a 14-page mimeographed book on how to build his pasture pens. They were 10 by 12, and they were made out of wood and chicken wire and some metal. And we built 3 of those and started doing his model out in the pasture here on the farm. And actually, both of my kids have 2 children, Zach, and then he has a younger sister, Sarah. And so the kids were involved in that, and Zach helped me in the morning do chores, moving those pens, and Sarah did it in the evening, and they were able to save some money and buy that first old beater car and all that sort of thing. So there was some incentive for them to do it. But after a while, we kind of decided that those pens were not ideal for our circumstance, and we designed our own pasture pens made out of hog panels that we bent in half with 45-degree corners so they wouldn't pile up, and used the tarp over 2/3 of it, and they worked pretty well for us. About 45 birds in a pen, but every day the labor is pretty extensive. You have to move those pens at least once a day so that they leave their manure behind and get fresh grass and bugs and so forth, and feed and water twice a day. And when you've got, 10 or 15 pens, that's not a small enterprise. So as we've now expanded, and we do about 4,000 meat birds a year now, the labor that it took to do that was just getting out of hand. It sort of spend your whole day with the chickens is what it felt like. So we moved to a day range system, which is where we use this electrified poultry netting. And when we started with that, we tried to configure the sections where the birds were in sort of a rectangular long way, and we had some low shelters that the birds, would get under in case there's rain or with shade and so on. We discovered, however, that the electrified poultry netting was fairly effective against ground predation, but that aerial predators, we have some hawks around, and that proved to be something of a problem. So we experimented with kind of moving those electric netting, and that was also very time consuming. And finally last year, halfway through the season, we determined that we could, set up, it's three nets. They're 164 feet long each. 3 nets in pretty much a square. We could use 4 of these low shelters. We could put 200 birds in there at a time. We could just move the shelters and not move the netting. And it was much less labor intensive. And if we positioned things right, the hawk pressure wasn't too great. We make feed twice a week. We use 300-pound range feeders, and so we didn't have to carry buckets every day to them. We use some automatic waters that have floats on it, and so the water issue wasn't so great. And so that's our system now. They go out to the pasture at 4 weeks old. Before that, they're in a brooder because especially this time of year, they need supplemental heat in order to get started. We get 200 birds, mailed birds every Friday. They're mailed to us from Pennsylvania. We have an old school bus that is our brooder. And it has 4 sections, and so we put the birds in section 1 on a Friday. When a week goes by, we move those birds to section 2, so there's room in section 1 for the new birds because section 1 has the greatest degree of supplemental heat. They move from 2 to 3 and 3 to 4, and by week 4, then they're in the back section, and we can drive the bus out to the pasture and just take them right out. So that works real well unless you have a wet season. And then it's a little bit of a problem, so there's always issues. We are going to experiment this year with doing some brooding actually out in the pasture when it gets warm enough here. We may not need the supplemental heat if we can insulate it well enough. So it keeps going through different iterations. But the birds stay on the farm about 9 to 10 weeks, depending on what time of year it is. They don't grow as quickly when it's super hot here. So we take them 10 weeks. And then they're, as I said, on Saturday morning, they come up to, we get up early and we go out at dawn and round up the birds, bring them up to our butcher facility. And it takes us maybe about 3 hours from the time we get them up here until they're done and we're cleaning up to butcher 200 birds a week. And then we have a walk-in freezer. We actually keep the birds for a while, and then on Mondays usually package the birds and freeze them in our walk-in freezer, and then they're for sale. We keep some of the birds fresh and deliver early then in the week to some of our restaurants. They would prefer to have a fresh rather than a frozen bird. And then the rest of them are sold as frozen birds still. They're either part of the meat CSA, the farm share CSA share, or people can come to our small farm store and buy them.
When you say that they're part of the farm share with the CSA program, how are you delivering those chickens in a safe way alongside the vegetables? Well,
we have a refrigerated truck, and so we use that. And Zach can maybe explain some about how he sets up there so that those things are distinct and kept safe and so forth, and yet a reasonable way. So when people move through, there's a good flow to it.
We got this refrigerated Sprinter van last season, and that has allowed us to do the kind of distribution that we're doing now with this farm share. So like we're transporting them in that. Everything is in separate containers. And then when we set up, we're doing market style CSA now. So we're putting the vegetables out on tables, but the chickens, which are frozen, are in coolers or insulated containers and kept separate from those. People go through and they get their vegetables first. When you sign up for the CSA, you get a reusable cloth bag for your vegetables, and then you get a reusable insulated bag for your meats. So in that way, we're even encouraging them to keep them separate as they take them home. That's our basic approach there.
One of the things, Chris, that we've been working quite steadily toward and very mindful of has to do with the food safety concerns on the farm and keeping things very separate. In terms of, as Zach mentioned, time and space or process. We don't go do animal chores and then go into the garden, for example, with those booths. And we have separate colored containers for livestock, for animal products and vegetable products, separate areas for things. And so that's been something that we've really been developing very intentionally here on the farm from start to finish.
Yeah, I think that's so important with the diversified operation to just have that heightened awareness. I think that, obviously not having produce and livestock on the same farm is technically the safest thing to do. But, if you want to get down to realistically, I think there are certainly ways that it can be managed very safely. And most of that comes down to, I think, an awareness. And like you say, just working hard to keep those processes and products separate.
Right. You have to be very mindful of it. That wasn't the old way of farming. My grandpa, wouldn't have thought of that at all. and just kind of did his work and went from one thing past the other. But we're real intentional too about working to train our people. And when people come to tour the farm, we even try to do a little education. Now we're going to go to the gardens first, and then we're going to go see the livestock, and it's a food safety issue. So we try to educate, folks in that regard as well.
It sort of succeeds or fails in the design of the system too. And Dad and I both really like the winter time to kind of step back and evaluate and plan. And we've found it more and more necessary to use that time to think through the food safety implications of our work on the farm. And it's been really necessary to get our help on board as well. It used to kind of just be my dad and I, and we divide a lot of labor. I spend a lot of time in the garden. Dad works with the livestock a lot. And as we would bring people in to help us, kind of through an informal internship program and some part-time help, in some ways we really wanted to give them that whole farm experience. But practically, as we've grown, it's been necessary to kind of assign people to certain areas of the farm for the most part. And by doing that, we're able to, I think, get in front of a lot of potential cross-contamination.
Now, the one livestock group that we haven't talked about is the beef production. Can you tell me a little bit more about how that works on your farm?
Yeah, we're sort of in an evolution there as well. When I started doing this long ago, I was committed to doing a grass-finished product and did a fair amount of research and reading and recognized that there were some breeds that finished on grass better than others. And in typical fashion, I sort of stumbled upon Jersey cattle as those that finish quite well on grass. And the way I stumbled upon it was nobody wanted Jerseys at that time, and they were really cheap. So I got them, and then learned that yeah, indeed, this meat is really, really good just on grass. So that's been for some time the basis of our it's a dairy breed, but it's been the basis of our beef business. We supplemented that. There was then Jerseys got popular, and so it was kind of a Jersey Holstein cross, or some of whatever I could get my hands on sometimes, but mostly it was still that dairy breed kind of stuff. But then now lately we are experimenting with some of a more heritage breed for a couple of reasons. One, the quality of the meat on like a red pole, for example, is one of the ones that we are favoring at this time. Really like the cattle, like the way they grow. They're not really, really huge. They're kind of a smaller framed animal, finish well on grass. We have some access to at least some, not a huge amount, but some of those, and know how they've been taken care of, and might at some point shift from purchasing feeders to moving toward a cow-calf operation where we have our own cows that calve on the farm. So we're slowly kind of moving toward that. But the cattle enterprise, they're on our farm for 2 years. And so that's a long time to keep something before you can harvest it, before you can sell it. So we can't be extremely nimble with it. So we're moving toward these red pools, but currently still the Jersey seem to be the basis for us. So this year will be, and cattle prices were really expensive not all that long ago, and so we resisted, and our herd's pretty small right now. But this year we'll be getting small bottle calves and starting them at a very young age, and keeping them on the farm for a couple of years then before they're able to be harvested as beef.
When you say the herd's pretty small, how small is small?
Yeah, I only have 9 cattle out on the pasture right now.
That's really small.
Yeah, compared
this last season would have been what, like 20, 25?
Yeah, I was, usually we'd have 25 or 30. But yeah, I just resisted. I didn't see how I could afford to buy cattle, keep them 2 years, and maybe make something on them. So we just diminished quite a bit. But this year we'll probably end up getting about 24 to 30 of those bottle calves, and then do the same thing next year, as well as add some of these red pools as that comes on. So we'll be building the herd pretty quickly, but it will be a while before we're able to harvest those.
Yeah, and cattle are like you kind of mentioned, they're not really huge money makers, so they're kind of like sweet corn for us, where we want to have enough on the farm to satisfy the desire, and everybody loves getting that pound of ground beef in their farm share every week. But thankfully, they're I guess probably the most hands-off animal that we raise. We did a kind of an intensive mob grazing style for a while, although we've backed off that a little bit because there's plenty to demand our attention during the course of the day, and so you kind of have to set things up for, like, if the animal can take care of itself, we'll let it do that until we have to step in.
Right. Yeah, so Zach's right. The farm chores, if all goes well and they're respecting fences and so on, it's kind of a daily fence move, making sure they have access to water and so on. So it can be an enterprise where they're tending themselves, again, as long as the season is providing adequate grass and those sort of things. We do one cutting of hay every year, just first cutting, and then keep it on the farm so we can feed it if we need to through the winter. But generally, they graze year round. Our pastures are about 50% fescue, and fescue maintains its nutrition throughout the winter, unlike the other grasses. And then of course they're outside. They're healthier when they're outside. They're leaving their manure outside, so we're not cleaning a barn, as much as if they were confined. We've got this little wood lot, as Zach said. It's a pretty sparse wood lot, but enough so that they can be out of the wind. And so for the first time this year, actually, they have not been in the barn at all. It used to be we'd bring them in the barn when it was windy. And then we would use the Joel Salatin system of put down straw. They would leave their manure on top of that. Then we'd spread corn and put straw on top of that. Then we'd turn pigs in there, and the pigs would root and try to find every kernel of corn and aerate that, so it would turn into something of a pre-compost. So it was a pretty good system, but cattle haven't been in the barn at all this winter, and so we won't even be doing that task with them.
With so many livestock species, plus the vegetables to be managed on your farm and marketing through CSA, farmers market, restaurants, and a pizza night, that's a whole lot of different moving pieces to manage. How do you guys keep all those balls in the air?
That's an interesting assumption, Chris. That we do keep all those balls in the air.
If you're still in business, you're doing somewhat of a job of keeping them in the air. So
yeah, no, I'm sorry. I just had to say that.
That's okay.
Zach mentioned earlier that if all goes well and we get some breathing room in the winter time, we're pretty committed to laying a fairly detailed plan and then doing our best to follow it during the course of the growing season. And that really is a most valuable tool for us to kind of know pretty much where we're headed, at least. But again, these are. We recognize everything on this farm is moving. Everything has kind of a sequence. Everything has a place. And so if we can figure that sequence out early on, barring extreme weather events or unforeseen kinds of things, we always have a plan B and a plan C. But generally that planning assists us a great deal as we try to keep everything, moving and in its place.
That's also been necessary to, I guess I hesitate to use the word divide the labor, because it's a small farm and we all kind of get pulled into everything. But I think it's Joel Salatin uses the idea of fiefdoms. And like I certainly have my little fiefdom on the farm, and Dad has his, where we're the ones who are in charge, and people know, to come to me if there's a question about the garden, or to go to Dad if there's a question about the chicken. And so we do depend on that. And then our relationship in bringing everything together to kind of have the whole farm function successfully.
With regards to the planning, Jeff, it's really easy to say, oh, we do a really thorough job of planning over the winter. What does But it's another thing to actually do that. What does that actually look like on your farm? What are the tools that you're using for making sure that things go from kind of this fuzzy idea in your head to actually, the cows are going to be here on this day and the broccoli is going to be here on that day?
Yeah. Zach and I are great spreadsheet fans, and he has insisted that we use the Google Doc, Google Sheet kind of thing, and he's really right, because then we have access and we can share it even with our health and so forth. So over these last few weeks, for example, I've mapped out, pretty thoroughly when I anticipate having pigs come to the farm. We're in the phase now of we buy feeder pigs. We did a little bit of our own breeding and farrowing here, but at this stage, it really makes more sense for us to buy feeders. The prices are really pretty good on that, and a little less of a management issue at this stage. So I've mapped that out pretty well, when that's going to happen, when those pigs will be ready to butcher, who's going to butcher them, made many of my appointments, so that I'm not stuck at the last minute. Oh, I have pigs that need to be butchered. Sorry, we're full for, 4 months. That kind of thing. Have that mapped out pretty well. I'm continuing now to work on the location of where my meat birds will be in the field and what's going to be necessary there. We have some systems in place where we make feed on Mondays and Thursdays, because our broilers, generally, that's, when we need it. Those 350-pound feeders generally will last 3 or 4 days. And then we'll also add and make feed on one of those days for the hogs, and maybe on another day for the laying hens. Have mapped out where the field work is going to happen. We have 10 acres of pasture that we're plowing up for our non-GMO corn that we raise and then use as feed for our pigs and chickens. Next to that is where we had the corn last year, and so that'll be a small grain. Kind of have all that in place now in the seed here on the farm for when the weather's fit to get that stuff seeded. So, it's a lot of paperwork. It's a lot of desk work, where you just imagine and envision and lay these things out where they're all supposed to go, and then Zach and I work together too. For example, I'm going to shortly, as soon as we're convinced that we can keep water flowing to the pasture and it won't freeze, we'll get that going again. We've got pipes laid on top of the ground. The plastic pipe laid on top of the ground so we can water out in the field. I'll start my pigs out in the pasture, and I'll time it in such a way so they end up where Zach wants to plow the garden for sweet corn next year, plow the pasture, for garden for sweet corn next year. So it's a lot of desk work trying to map all these things and how they go on the farm. But we just take that pretty seriously in the wintertime, trying to get it laid out.
For the garden, Google Drive has become pretty indispensable. When I took over the planning of the garden, I came across a spreadsheet developed at Michigan State University. I think it was for their student organic farm, which had it was a lot of formulas already plugged in for planning a CSA. So I started using that, and then over the years, I've kind of tweaked it to fit our operation and just the way my mind works, I guess. But that really becomes the heart of the garden plan. And then that was an Excel spreadsheet, but I put it into Google Sheets, so I always have it at my fingertips with my iPhone in the field or in the greenhouse or wherever. So I'm pretty constantly looking at that to see what needs to get done, updating it, making notes in the spreadsheet so it's all collected there. And then we use Google Drive for a number of other things too, whether it's like signing up people for the CSA or keeping records. In fact, this season, I tried to do this a few years ago and we just couldn't stick with it. But this season, we're going to be trying to use the Veggie Compass system to track our labor and to track expenses so we can do a better job of analyzing profits at the end of the season. So yeah, those spreadsheets. We used to call my dad Chart Man when I was growing up, and I guess I got it honestly.
Nice. I think there's worse skills to have, right? Jeff?
For me, it's a coping mechanism. My wife says I have adult onset ADD, so I got to put it in a chart or I'll just get distracted. and that Zach is really he's the king though of I over time have come to recognize, let's not give myself that much credit yet. I'm coming to recognize the value of careful record keeping. I've not been particularly wonderful about that, and Zach is really taking that to a new level here on the farm, and his encouragement will get me there too, I think. But that's just pretty important. We're a small batch farm. The margin isn't real great, and so the kinds of things that we have to do to stay in business will be these particular, I call them fussy kinds of things. But yeah, there's really a place for it if you want to stay in business, I think.
Just on the subject of profitability, without going into specific numbers or anything, are you guys making a living on the farm now?
Well, after a fashion, I would say that the farm for me, until that came back in 2013 or 2014, really, the farm for me was basically a break-even proposition, and so my living would come through the not-for-profit, which the farm hosted and contributed to and so forth. But when he came back, it was, well, now wait a minute, this farm needs to be someplace where both of us make a living then, if we're going to dedicate our time to it. So currently, Zach is making something of a living, though it's fairly meager at this stage. And I don't get an actual paycheck from the farm yet, but I am looking to next year. Nevertheless, there's tons of value from it. The farm is responsible to, cover some of the costs that if we just lived in town, we'd have to, cover. So in some sense, that's certainly a paycheck. So right now, one person is making a living, and next year we anticipate the second one will be.
With the two of you working together on the farm, a father-son dynamic's not always the smoothest and easiest thing, especially when you've got people both engaged in the same enterprises and things are pretty high stakes. How do you make that work?
Well, I'm going to answer it first, Zach, if that's okay with you, because I think the onus of that question is on the old guy more than the young guy. I observe that in these kind of relationships, and especially in farming, it's the old guy that's the stick in the mud and stubborn and all that sort of thing, and that really is an impediment to a good relationship. So I have a tremendous amount of respect for Zach and for his wisdom with things. He's a hard worker. Somebody raised him right, I think, so that's a good thing. And so I am ever mindful that one of my major jobs here is to listen to him and take him seriously. That doesn't mean we can't disagree. That doesn't, at all. I mean, we certainly can, and we can work that out. But I've pledged to not be that stick in the mud, and I think that that's a big responsibility. It really is on the old guy. Having said that, that's worthy of respect, and that matters a great deal too. So from my perspective, anyway, I'm really grateful that he wants to come back and that I am able to continue to turn things over step by step, to him, and super confident that he's well up to the task. It's really kind of nice to get old because you can kind of say things like, I'm too old to do that. You guys do it. So there's some of a privilege to it.
How about from your perspective, Zach?
Yeah, I've been really grateful to my dad for taking that approach. I think another important piece is that we both do have our own spheres of management, spheres of operation, and Dad was gracious in many ways to kind of give me a lot of responsibility right away and let me make a lot of my own mistakes when I'm sure he could have stepped in to give me some guidance. He gives me lots of guidance, but I think he'll often let me come to him for that, and that's really kind of helped me develop as a farmer. I think also it's no one planned this, but I was away from the farm for many years after graduating high school. And I think by leaving and gaining some perspective, and then coming back as a partner in farming lent something to the nature of our relationship, where we've been able to work together as equal partners and to learn a lot from each other. But I also think that it's just really important that we both really love working on the farm. We both care for it, and we both get a lot of joy from it. We both have a lot of fun, and we're able to keep that as part of the relationship. When we're not, trying to figure out a problem or plan the next season, we're usually coming to each other with just kind of the next crazy idea, or what if we tried this? And that, I don't know, that just, it keeps things a little bit lighter, and I think it keeps us both in pretty good spirits.
Well, we do both have the same temperament in that farming to us is not a job. It's a vocation. If you look at the root of that word, kind of a calling. And we do feel called to it. We're passionate about it. We both see it as something of an adventure. We both would claim that it's not only our work, but it's our entertainment. I mean, we just like doing it. and to share that temperament goes a long way too, I think.
Do you both live together there on the farm?
No, that's another key part of keeping the relationship intact. So my wife and I live very close. It's actually just right across the pasture in a small field. So it's a pretty short commute. But being able to, part ways at the end of the day for a little while and have our own home places, I think keeps things running smoothly.
And Zach, you mentioned your wife, and Jeff, you mentioned your wife earlier. Are they involved in the farm?
My wife was a public school teacher until last year, and she retired from that. And so when you live on a farm, you're certainly somewhat part of it, but she never saw it really as her calling necessarily. And that remains to this day, though. She is more involved because she's here in some of the tasks. One way that, though, she's really involved in this, she's a formidable presence, which is sort of needed for somebody who can be fairly bullheaded about the farm. And one of the ways that shows up is she works pretty hard to get me off of the farm in one fashion or another. I would kind of just stay here and work all the time, but she's more social. And so in terms of occasional things like that, or most recently, we spent a week in South Carolina on vacation. And that doesn't come easy for me necessarily to leave for a week. Livestock still need attending, and there's always some crisis that happens, but she just declares it, demands it, and it has to happen. And that's a real gift. So that's a sort of a coming at it from a little different angle, but it really contributes to the health of the farm because it contributes to the health of this farmer. So yeah, she's involved certainly in that way, but not day to day.
How about your wife, Zach?
It's similar with my wife, Kira. She is an actor, actually. So she works at a regional theater in our area and actually teaches at the university in town too. But it's because it is a small family farm, she gets roped in as well. Kind of find her helping with pizza night, or you're heading to this town. Can you take these eggs to this restaurant on your way? That sort of thing. And we actually just had a daughter about 5 months ago. And so she's, of course, we're both, that changes everything, right? And your time gets structured a lot differently. And so it's nice that we're both not so focused on the work of the farm, so we're freed up for a lot of those other things.
Yeah, you did, mention that too. Kathy is involved certainly in pizza night, but I think I still, pretty heavily involved in, and many of the farm decisions, run by her, and she has, really good wisdom on a lot of those things. I do need to say that. It's not like, I didn't want to make it sound like she was not involved or held it at arm's length. She doesn't, at all. But you don't find her, on the tractor, disking that area of the garden for Zach.
And sometimes I forget. So Kira, my wife, is from suburban Minneapolis, so definitely more of a city girl. But she actually came when we first started dating and spent a summer on the farm with me and my family, putting pepper plants in the ground, and really, she's kind of technically an intern, I suppose, although not really, because she came to be with me. But she got, early on in our relationship, she got a true taste of what the rhythms of the farm and what the work is, and I think that because of that, she has a lot of emotional ownership in the farm. and cares for it, and obviously cares for my love for it. And I could see down the line, and I don't know that she'll ever be full-time on the farm, but she certainly does love it, and I could see her taking on more of a formal role in the future.
And I do want to say one other thing, too, about that. I mean, now that I think about it, I was just thinking about, Kathy washes eggs for us, for example. But what her real responsibility here, and it really is a significant responsibility with regard to the farm. She sees this as her home first and our home first, and then a farm second. And I can tend to reverse those. And she enforces pretty strongly that whole sense of maintaining a sense of home. She cares about its beauty and how it looks and where boundaries are, like on pizza night, and all that sort of thing. And she takes that responsibility seriously, and it's a really good thing. I think that all passionate farmers risk being captured way too mightily by the farm and by its tasks and by its demands and its responsibilities, to the detriment maybe of it being a home. And she doesn't let that happen. So that's, again, pretty huge in terms of the success and the health of this farm. And I really credit her with that.
With that, we're going to turn to the lightning round. And we're going to get a quick word from one more sponsor, and then we'll be right back. This lightning round and the Farmer to Farmer podcast is brought to you by Farmers Web, software for your farm. Farmers Web makes it easy to work with your buyers, saving you time, increasing efficiency, reducing mistakes, and streamlining order management from start to finish. No more lost order slips and invoices. Know which of your buyers have already paid and which have not. Keep records and download your financial data. Farmers Web helps you manage orders from buyers who place them online, but also from those who order by phone, text, or email. Save time and reduce errors by keeping all of your orders in one place, automatically generating harvest and picking lists, product catalogs, and packing slips. Farmers Web helps inform your buyers of delivery routes, pickup locations, lead times, and order minimums, while also helping you keep track of buyer payment terms, special pricing, and customer information for all of your buyers. A flat monthly fee and flexible plan types allow you to pause, cancel, or switch plan types from month to month at any time, even during the off-season. FarmersWeb.com. All right, Zach, what's your favorite tool on the farm?
It's hard for me to do favorites, but I mentioned that drop spreader earlier, and if I kind of think over the past season and one tool that has really changed the nature of a job, I guess I'll go with that drop spreader.
And how about you, Jeff?
So many tools are so important, but I'm going to go with one of my more recent acquisitions because of the way that it has helped decrease my anxiety significantly, and that is my hog cart. We have hydraulic hog cart that our little John Deere 530 can barely lift, and we have very much on it. But still, trying to load hogs is just a trial often. Pig-headed, that phrase comes from somewhere. And having this hog cart where we can lower it all the way to the ground and they can walk on, and then hydraulically we can lift it up and take them somewhere, load them on a trailer, has just made me sleep better at night on the days, the nights before we're supposed to load hogs. So I'm going to say my hog cart.
And Zach, I'll ask you, because you're the gardener, what's your favorite crop to grow?
This will probably give away kind of where I am in my gardening journey, and who knows, maybe it's make more experienced people shake their heads. But I just really love to grow kind of whatever I happen to be experimenting with that season. And I've had to limit that. So I give myself 8 50-foot beds that are right next to our pizza oven. So they're kind of like a part of the farm where everybody can look and kind of walk around and maybe see what's interesting. So that's where I try out new crops, maybe things that I've talked about with chefs or just something I saw in the seed catalog. But lately also where that sense of experimentation has been gathering has been in the cover crops that we're using out in the garden, and especially the small grains, and the fact that we're now planting some patches of small grains and harvesting them for human consumption. But with the cover crops, I just sort of love the idea of growing something that's, it's for a purpose that's a little bit larger than just harvesting and selling it, right? It's it's there for the microbial life of the soil, and it's there to hold things in place, and its effects will be felt long into the future. And so I think I'm kind of most happy when I'm putting those in the ground. Plus, it's a great time of year to be working. Like when I'm putting those in late summer and the light's low and the season is kind of starting to wind down. It's a good time to be outside.
Great. And another one for you, Zach. What's your dad's farmer superpower?
My dad's farmer superpower, I think to kind of look risk in the face and just be like, oh, well.
I like that.
I get a little bit more like worried and anxious about things, but Dad's pretty good at managing that.
And how about the vice versa on that, Jeff? What's Zach's farmer superpower?
Let me venture two things. One, I think that his superpower is his commitment to research and ask all the questions. But secondly, I think Zach has how will I call it? A soil wisdom, a land wisdom. I think he just feels things in his bones, and the way he treats the soil, what he sees there that maybe other people don't see, that's a superpower for sure.
Jeff, if you could go back in time and tell your beginning farmer self one thing, what would it be?
Well, I think it would have made some of this make more sense and been easier if I had. In 2003, I did a farm business planning course through our county extension called "Tilling the Soil of Opportunity," and I almost got put together a business plan. I got close, but then life happened and it never quite got completed. And I think if I could go back and tell myself something, I would say finish the business plan and update it annually. Make the plan and work the plan and adapt the plan. That seems to me that would be a wonderful thing to have enforced early on.
How about you, Zach? If you could go back in time and tell yourself one thing when you were just really getting into the business, what would it be?
I think I'd actually tell myself to cook more. It's something that I certainly get a lot of joy from now. I spent a lot of time learning how to bake early on, but if I had to cook, it'd be from recipes. I didn't really develop just the techniques to kind of take anything and put a meal together. But as I've done that, I just have a better sense of the food that we're producing. I get a better sense of like what kind of products to offer to our CSA members and to the chefs, and it just sort of like it deepens my relationship with the food when I can, start it as a seed and grow it in the garden, but then also take it in the kitchen and prepare it. So yeah, I think I'd say cook more. It also actually provides a good sense of like boundary during the workday. I do a lot of the cooking at home, and so like if I am responsible for getting a meal on the table, I know I need to wrap it up in the garden and get out of there.
Jeff and Zach, thank you so much for being on the Farmer to Farmer podcast today.
Well, thank you, Chris. This was fun.
Yeah, and it's a real honor to be able to chat with you. We're big fans of the podcast and just all it's doing and how it's giving people across the country kind of a starting point for talking, and also how it's telling the story of some of the things that are happening in agriculture right now. So thanks, Chris, for the work you're doing.
I echo that.
Thank you. All right, so wrapping things up here, I'll say again that this is episode 119 of the Farmer to Farmer podcast, and you can find the notes for this show at farmertofarmerpodcast.com by looking on the episodes page or just searching for Hawkins. That's Hawkins. The transcript for this episode is brought to you by Earth Tools, offering the most complete selection of walk-behind farming equipment and high-quality garden tools in North America, and by Rock Dust Local, the first company in North America specializing in local sourcing and delivery of the best rock dust and biochar for organic farming. Additional funding for transcripts is provided by North Central SARE, providing grants and education to advance innovations in sustainable agriculture. You can get the show notes for every Farmer to Farmer podcast in your inbox by signing up for my email newsletter at farmertofarmerpodcast.com. Also, if you enjoy the show, please head on over to iTunes and leave us a review or talk to us in the show notes or tell your friends on Facebook. We're at Purple Pitchfork on Facebook. And hey, When you talk to our sponsors, let them know how much you appreciate their support of a resource that you value. You can support the show directly by going to farmertofarmerpodcast.com/donate. I'm working on making the best farming podcast in the world, and you can help. Finally, please let me know who you would like to hear from on the show through the suggestions form at farmertofarmerpodcast.com. I'll do my best to get them on the show. Thank you for listening. Be safe out there and keep the tractor running.